Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, investors are in wait-and-see mode ahead of tomorrow's key jobs report. More on that in a moment. But yesterday, after another weak reading in the labor market, U.S. two-year note yields briefly fell below the 10-year note. Stocks fell as well, led by tech shares. Joe Quinlan is head of CIO market strategy for Merrill and Bank of America Private Bank.
Given the fact that we've had a really good run this year, I'm not surprised we're seeing some profit taking. September is always a rough month for the markets. There's concerns about the tightening of the race, the presidential race. And I think this pullback in megatech is healthy, actually. I mean, our clients' conversations about the valuations of some of these companies. So any pullback here is healthy. The U.S. economy is chugging along. It's not great, but it's good. It's not stalling. It's cool. It's cooling down a bit, but we're in good shape heading into the year end.
Bank of America Private Bank's Joe Quinlan says he's advising clients to buy dips in the market.
Well, Nathan, one of the stocks leading declines in yesterday's session was NVIDIA. It has now dropped 11% over the past 2 days. And let's get the latest from Bloomberg's John Tucker. And John, there's some new information about a Justice Department probe here.
Yeah, Karen, NVIDIA says it has not been subpoenaed. You'll recall we reported the Justice Department is conducting an antitrust investigation. And the DOJ often sends out requests for information in the form of what's known as a civil investigative demand, which is commonly referred to as a subpoena. Now, sources tell Bloomberg the DOJ has indeed sent such a request seeking information about NVIDIA's acquisition of Run AI and aspects of its chip business. The company says, quote, "We are happy to answer questions regulators may have about our business." NVIDIA has drawn regulatory scrutiny since becoming the world's most valuable chip maker and a key beneficiary of the AI spending boom. NVIDIA pre-market is most active. Shares are up about 0.7%. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, John, thank you. Now, turning back to the economy, a key week for labor market data continues this morning. We get a preview from Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
Jobs Week continues with two more inputs to economists thinking about what the August employment report will show on Friday. ADP's monthly jobs report, based on payrolls handled by the data processor, don't forecast the government numbers, but generally do capture the direction. They'll likely show a rebound in hiring last month, if that's what we're likely to see on Friday. The claims report is for last week, so it won't reflect conditions during the payroll survey week earlier in August, but it should suggest whether we are starting to see layoffs. So far, initial claims have remained low with no sign companies are cutting workers, although rising continuing claims show it might be getting harder for those without a job to find a new one. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Mike, thanks. Well, as investors and the Fed await that key data, Oaktree Capital's Howard Marks says U.S. interest rates will settle in a range of between 3% and 4%. He told the conference in Australia, quote, "We're not going back to 0 or a half or 1.
All right, let's turn to politics now, Karen. Vice President Kamala Harris is talking about capital gains tax rates. She wants to pare back the increase that President Biden has proposed. Details from Bloomberg's Amy Morris.
A campaign official tells Bloomberg the move aims to bolster Harris's efforts to court the business community and deep-pocketed donors in her bid for the White House. Harris announced her plan at a rally in New Hampshire.
If you earn $1 million a year or more, the tax rate on your long-term capital gains will be 28% under my plan.
Now, you might recall President Biden had proposed a series of increases on capital gains tax rates to between 39.6 and 44.6. Harris is breaking from that, saying that when the government encourages investment, it can lead to broad-based economic growth. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Amy, thank you. Well, President Biden is making a decision that could have implications in the 2024 race. Bloomberg News has learned the president is preparing to block Nippon Steel's $14.1 billion takeover of U.S. Steel. Bloomberg's Martin Ritchie reports a decision could come as soon as this week.
For Nippon Steel, it's a big blow. They were hoping to, expand their footprint globally as domestic demand for steel ebbs in Japan. And for U.S. Steel, the company itself had agreed to this takeover. Their shares slumped, were down 17% by close of business yesterday.
Bloomberg's Martin Ritchie says U.S. Steel's CEO has warned plants could close and jobs could be lost if the deal does not go through. The merger is going through a review from the Secretive Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., and sources tell us Biden plans to kill it as soon as it lands on his desk.
Well, Karen, both Kamala Harris and former President Trump are getting ready for their first debate next week in Philadelphia. Trump was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania last night for an event hosted by Fox News. He said his debate strategy will be to let Harris talk, and he complained about some of the terms of the debate on ABC News.
I agreed to do it because they wouldn't do any other network. The other thing is, her best friend is the head of the network. Her husband's best friend is married to the head of the network. And they're going to get the questions.
And former President Trump has pushed to keep microphones turned on only when the candidate is speaking. ABC agreed to those rules and says both campaigns had agreed to them as well. But the Harris campaign had pushed against it, saying that keeping the mics on would put her at a disadvantage. Our coverage of the ABC News presidential debate begins Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Wall Street time on a special edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
Well, Nathan, as we await next week's debate, Harris is picking up the endorsement of a former Republican representative. Liz Cheney says she will support Kamala Harris for president. Cheney, who co-chaired the House investigation into the January 6th attack, became a fierce Trump critic. She was ousted in her 2022 Republican primary in Wyoming as a result.
And Karen, a former Treasury Secretary has a warning about U.S. policy against China. Speaking at a summit in Shanghai, Robert Rubin said politicians should be careful not to go too far with trade restrictions and tariffs on China while trying to safeguard national security. Back in May, President Biden announced plans to raise tariffs on Chinese imports, including semiconductors, solar cells, and critical minerals, with rates ranging from 25% for batteries to 100% for electric vehicles.
And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Tips about online posts threatening a school shooting last year led Georgia police to interview a young teenage boy, but investigators didn't have enough evidence for an arrest. Yesterday, officials said the now 14-year-old opened fire at a high school outside Atlanta, killing 4 people and wounding 9. Authorities say the teen, identified as Colt Gray, has been charged as an adult in the deaths of 2 Appalachia High School students and 2 teachers. Barrow County Sheriff Judd Smith.
All of our victims that are at the hospital are going to make it and going to recover well, as we've been told, and we don't expect any more fatalities at this time.
Georgia Governor Brian Kemp.
This is everybody's worst nightmare, and I just want to offer my sincere condolences and our thoughts and prayers to the families that have lost loved ones, for those that are injured and continuing to fight.
Governor Kemp. Authorities say the suspect who surrendered is cooperating. Attempts by Russia to influence the 2024 presidential election have brought 2 indictments and warnings from the Justice Department. The Biden administration alleges that senior aides to Russian leader Vladimir Putin engaged in a sweeping operation aimed at supplying millions of Americans with disinformation to sow division and secure Russia's preferred outcome of re-electing Donald Trump. Attorney General Merrick Garland.
The Justice Department is seizing 32 internet domains that the Russian government and the Russian-sponsored actors have used to engage in a covert campaign to interfere and influence the outcome of our country's elections.
The Biden administration also says Russia tried to peddle pro-Russian propaganda, especially related to the war in Ukraine. President Joe Biden will announce $7.3 billion in awards for more than a dozen rural electric cooperatives during a trip to Wisconsin today. The funding is expected to help underwrite the purchase of clean energy, as well as investments in transmission lines, substation upgrades, and software to help lower energy costs. Global news 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with Dan Schwartzman. Dan, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. American Jessica Pegula advancing to the semifinals at the U.S. Open with a straight sets win over top-seeded Iga Swiatek. This marks the first time Pegula has advanced past the quarterfinal round of a Grand Slam after being 0-6 previously. Pegula talking about her performance.
I thought I played, really clean match, served pretty well, returned well. I feel like I didn't really do anything that bad and was able to kind of jump on her really early and I think frustrate her, and was able to keep my level even when she picked it up in the second set. So, I think I just played all around really good tennis today.
That's courtesy of the U.S. Open. In the other matchup, Karolina Muchova knocking out Beatrice Haddad-Maia in straight sets. In the men's draw, top seed Jannik Sinner dominates Daniil Medvedev to advance to the semis, while Jack Draper has yet to lose a set so far this tournament after beating Alex de Minaur in straight sets. Coming up this evening, Arina Sabalenka faces Emma Navarro, while Pegula plays Muchova in the semis. NFL regular season kicking off tonight in Kansas City. The defending Super Bowl champion Chiefs hosting the Baltimore Ravens. Mets win their 7th in a row, 8-3 over the Red Sox. Mets remaining a half game behind the Braves in the NL wildcard race after the Braves knock off the Rockies 5-2. Meanwhile, Yankees remaining a half game behind the Orioles in the AL East, a 10-6 loss at the Rangers, while Baltimore falls to the White Sox 8-1. Chicago snapping a 12-game losing streak. Elsewhere, the Nationals fall to the Marlins 4-3. Diamondbacks beat the Giants 6-4. Athletics getting dominated by the Mariners 16-3. That's your Bloomberg Sports Report. Sports Update. I'm Dan Schwartzman, Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. Taxes and the economy, they are emerging as key themes ahead of the first debate for Donald Trump and Kamala Harris next week. The vice president is making a pitch for higher capital gains taxes as she fleshes out her economic policy.
We know when the government encourages investment, it leads to broad-based economic growth and it creates jobs, which makes our economy stronger.
That was the vice president as she called for a 28% rate for capital gains taxes during a speech in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Joining us this morning is Bloomberg News senior editor Bill Ferries. Bill, good morning. It's a higher rate, but not as high as President Biden has called for. So what's the contrast she's trying to draw here?
Well, she's, we're 2 months out, and there's been some questions about whether how she would differentiate herself from President Joe Biden. So maybe this is the start of that in the kind of home stretch of the campaign. She said she would like to see a 28% capital gains tax rate on people earning $1 million or more. That's down from the 39.6% rate that President Joe Biden had supported. So, a little bit of a differentiation there. Kamala Harris has started to put more flesh on her economic plan. That comes after a few weeks of criticism that wasn't clear what her policies were. So we're heading into this debate now, starting to see that. The capital gains tax is one. We've seen her propose a tax deduction for startup costs for small businesses that would go up to $50,000 from $5,000, and she said she's going to set a goal of trying to get 25 million new business applications in the first term of her administration. That would be an increase from about 19 million under Biden so far. So we're starting to hear a few more details. I think she'll show up at that debate less likely to face criticism that people don't know what her policies are.
Are you expecting that we're going to hear many more details on former President Trump's economic proposals? A lot of calls for tax cuts across the board when he speaks before the Economic Club of New York later today.
Yeah, I think, one of his signature achievements, I think, of his administration was that 2017 tax bill. It lowered taxes primarily on businesses. I think, he views that as kind of the winning issue across the board. There have been some questions about how much it would cost. It's one study has put it in the several $1 trillion over 10 years. So he hasn't really explained how he would pay for that beyond, he says it would boost economic growth, and that would kind of pay for itself. I think there's still going to be a lot of questions about that. But you'll have two dueling economic plans to see get debated next week when we have this first debate between the two candidates.
I wonder if we're going to see much political impact on this reporting that President Biden, as soon as this week, could move to block the U.S. steel takeover by Japan's Nippon Steel.
Yeah, there's really no political support in the U.S. at this point in either party for this proposal. It seems like the president's opposition to it, along with Vice President Harris's opposition, Donald Trump's opposition, it seems like that would be sufficient to kill this off, at least for the foreseeable future. It was a $14 billion takeover proposal. The companies on both sides, Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel, of course, in support of it. But it's this is U.S. Steel is a company based in the biggest swing state of them all, Pennsylvania. The unions are not for it. So, both parties going after those working class voters. You have to really question the timing of the proposal and why Nippon Steel thought that was that right in the middle of a presidential campaign was the time to throw this out there. It does seem to be dead in the water.
Just 30 seconds left. I wonder what you make of former President Trump saying his debate strategy is going to be to let Harris talk when there's been all this back and forth about whether to keep the mics on during the whole debate.
Yeah, well, Republicans have said that they've criticized Kamala Harris for saying that some of her answers don't get to the point, that she speaks in word salads. I think that's what the president is going for or hoping for in this case. But he also said, listen, he used that Mike Tyson quote about everyone has a strategy till they get punched in the face. He said he's willing to shift gears. I don't think we know what's going to happen. I think it could be a real free-for-all, but we'll all have to tune in and see.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.